Welcome to Segmented Turning Part 4, and each time we move a little farther along. Last time we completed this little bowl, which we're able to do on a single faceplate by aligning the various different rings, and we used this device screwed onto our tailstock, a set of jumbo jaws with these screws adjusted to get that ring perfectly centered. Well, I want to show you other ways to do the same thing. The bowl was shallow and I needed some way to grab it at the rim. Well, this project is a little deeper. And one of the things we're going to be doing is working on two different faceplates, building the vessel from the bottom up and from the top down. And I still have a ring to fasten on. So one of the problems is, how do I get this properly centered? Let's get this out of the way. And there are a lot of different ways. Now, the one-way live center system, or the jet, comes with a couple of cones that allow us to line up smaller projects. Well, that cone is just very close, but not good enough. There are the way we did it last time. We can also use a device like this, which is called a Longworth chuck. And as you can see, one plate rotates against the other, and it can be adjusted to hold things of a lot of different sizes. This is designed to be grabbed in the jaws of a 4-jaw chuck, which we would just mount over here. That's another way just to get it aligned. This is not strong enough to turn, but it's good enough to get the glue in place. I'm not going to use that either, but I could. I have some other cones. Well, unfortunately, this is no longer available in the market, but this is a piece of solid aluminum, and it screws right onto the one-way live center and allows me to position rings very carefully where there's some depth and allow this to go. Well, you can't buy this anymore, and it's also pretty heavy. But Steve Sinner on his website sells a set of cones, 3 actually, one smaller, this size, and one larger, that screw onto your one-way or jet live center. Allows me to get that that ring perfectly centered. And that's what we're going to do first. Well, how did I get this far? Well, I made all these rings. This is the top of the vessel. This will be the top of the vessel. This is the bottom of the vessel. I have a large piece of walnut. Actually, it was left over from some other project, and I'm going to use it for the base. Ring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I split this vessel at the spot where the curvature is almost vertical, so that it's easier to align these components. I'll set this back out of the way again. I did have some help this time. I went to my Woodturner Pro software, came up with a shape that I liked, laid out the number of rings I wanted. I laid out the height of each ring, being 1/2 inch. And because there's so many pieces, I just went ahead and then printed out the cut sheet. And it lists each of the rings from base, which it calls number 1, all the way up through the top. And I knew how long a piece of wood I needed. I knew how wide to rip it to. And then I knew the segment edge length, which is what I cut. It's just the same way we've cut all the other pieces. But I wanted to show you that as projects get more complicated, sometimes it's just faster to use some commercial software. Well, I've got to get this ring on and glued in place before we can go farther, because we're going to do this vessel today. So both of these are on faceplates. It is my always technique to use faceplates, because I can take them off and put them back on as many times as I need without losing registration. Well, there it is. I have actually gone to my disc sander and flattened one side of this. So this is ready to glue on. I haven't touched this yet, so this has to get flattened. And then the ring has to be aligned and some glue applied. and we go forward from there. So let's get this flat. And what I'm going to use is a bowl gouge, a sanding stick, and a nice straight edge. I know this has a straight edge on it, to get this good and flat. So my bowl gouge is my first tool of choice. Now the lathe hasn't been used since last video, so speed's down to 0. And that looks to be around 1200 RPM. And it's running pretty true, but every time I glue a ring into a project, I flatten it. Even if both sides of this had been flattened and I put it on here, I'm going to re-flatten the outside, just because gluing on could always add a little bit of torquing to the piece. Check it every single time and re-flatten. So a couple of quick cuts, and you can tell it's not perfect. Better do that. Just a couple light pull cuts. As long as you hear that tat 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 sound, it means it's not running true. Let's just check, see how we're doing. Now, by doing it this way, it looks like it's almost flat, just a little high on the inside. That looks pretty good. So we'll sand. You've seen this. And the purpose of that is to make sure this ring is as flat as I can possibly make it. And I'm running my finger around here trying to see if there's any low spots. And actually I found one right there. This corner right here. It's not perfect yet. I think it's close enough I can sand it in, which is what I'll do. If you have problems and you're checking this and it's not coming out exactly right, run a pencil line all the way across here, sand it, and if the pencil line totally disappears, then you know you've got a flat. If there's a spot of pencil still showing, then you know you have a spot that's not up to the surface yet, so you need to do something else. Okay, that piece is ready to glue on. So I need to position this ring. Let me do a test fit first. The idea is I want to make sure everything's in the right place. And because this vessel's hollow in here, this cone sets down inside, it's a perfect way for lining these. So now how am I going to line it? The first piece went on. The second piece, I found the center of the first segment, and I centered up the joint. Third one I lined up with the first one, second with the fourth, and so on. So this one, I'm going to line it up so that the glue joint lines up with the glue joint 2 rings down. It creates what we call a perfect brick lay. I'm going to show you other ways of doing that in the future, but not today. So this just needs some glue, and it's ready to go. I'm going to leave that there. Just back off the tailstock. Now, the other cone has more of a point, and because of that, I have to back it off even farther to get in there. But this is going to be fine. So back to my regular yellow glue. Dye-Bond Original. Quick bead. Spread, always with my finger, just to get it as smooth and level and even as possible, and to be sure that there are no lumps to interfere. It's ready to go on. So I'm going to move the tailstock anyway, even though I said I wasn't going to. Oh well. Now, let's get that joint lined up. Just a little pressure on the tailstock and some wiggling to spread the glue. If you keep wiggling, you're going to find after a few seconds you're not going to be able to move it anymore. It will have tack, just like I showed you on those little pieces. And I'll look at the other side to make sure it's still aligned. Check several spots. Looks good. So, while that's setting, I'm tacking for a minute. Let me talk to you for a second, and I'm going to take it off and put the other piece back on. I've had some questions come up through your comments, which we really appreciate your comments and your support by responding. One of the things that the comment came up is, was it important to have the grain aligned as we do segment work? And the answer is absolutely. The grain on this piece is always going this direction. That means as the moisture, humidity, atmospheric conditions change and the wood swells and shrinks, it's doing it in this plane here. So the whole vessel will move together and the joints will stay tight. Nothing will move relative to each other. The moment I have a cross grain situation where they're going in two different planes like this, I have a situation where the vessel could actually separate at that joint. The glue joint could be overcome by the motion of the wood itself. Also, if the grain was aligned like this, you can see that it could pull the segments within the ring apart. So we work really hard in segment turning to be sure all the grain is aligned in the same plane and horizontally wherever possible. There are times in some advanced designs that there's nothing we can do but to work cross grain, and I understand that creates issues. But as long as the pieces are very, very small and we're moving in a cross grain situation, the amount of actual movement will be very small. So that piece is ready. This side here still needs to be flattened. Let's take that off and let me show you how I'm going to mount it for turning. Well, I don't need that cone anymore, but I'm going to go back to my thread adapter. This is 1x8. And this piece, I'm going to move over to the tailstock side. And the base of the piece, I'm going to mount on the headstock side. Now I know this hasn't been flattened, so it's not ready for gluing. And I'm not interested in gluing right now. I'm only interested in getting the outside shape. So what I have done is aligned these pieces. I'm going to take a pencil and just for reference purposes, put a mark on the two face plates. So if those are back in that same position, that'll be good to know. Everything's tight. Pressure here. Now I know that glue is not fully tacked, but I've got pressure on it. That's going to help. I also know that at this point I can begin to work on the exterior shape. I'm going to turn that first, get the shape I want, then turn the interior until it matches and the wall thickness is as I would like it. Then I'm going to flatten this point right here and glue these two halves together. Just for remembrance purposes, it's nice to always have a picture of what I'm going to be doing. Excuse me. So it's sitting on the vessel, sitting on the lathe in this position right here, so I kind of know the shape I'm looking for. These rings here and these rings here, the most top and the most bottom, actually I've actually added more material on the inside than necessary for the design. It gives it more mechanical support as we begin to work it. You can see in the drawing here, 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 and here, I have actually extended the width of the pieces to allow for just for support. The bigger the vessel becomes, the taller it becomes, the more you're going to need at each end simply to support it. I always add the extra material to the inside of the design because when the outside reaches the flats and the flat is finally round, I know I'm at the shape that I'm looking for. So this sets aside, and I'm ready to get out my bowl gouge and do some turning. Fun thing about grain going this direction, it's going to be really easy to turn. So my first steps, take that speed back down to 0 again. And first thing is just knock these corners off and get this roughly round. So there's a lot of bouncing around, but very light cuts. I'm just getting the corners knocked off now, both directions. So, this is going to be interesting. This is curly eucalyptus. It's a wood that I have not worked with. I had a big board of it in my shop for a long time, and I thought it'd be interesting to see what this comes out like. But you can see the shape beginning to evolve. You see a dark line right about here, and that is the joint that is not flat and not glued. That's where it's going to open back up again. So I'm just going to continue to work on the exterior shape. I'm going to take the base down just a little bit, but not completely. Same thing up here, because I'm running into my glue block. So I'll continue to work this more, a little more speed. My cuts are always from the highest spot towards the lower spots. That means downhill to the grain, less chance of pulling out fibers. I know the base needs to get smaller, and I can see where it's going to go, but I'm not going to touch it, not for a while. Turning down my glue block a little bit. Be cautious. There are screws in here. Got to know where they are. Just like the bottom, this has to come in more, but not now. So I'm looking for where any major irregularities are right here around this ring. More to come. Okay. That's going to be interesting looking wood. Has a tendency to chip out, so I'm going to have to be cautious about that. But now let's work inside the base. So first thing I'm going to do is take this off. I don't really have to take it off, but I just want to get it out of the way, and it's the easiest way to do it is to remove the piece, set it aside, bring my tailstock back. Now we're going to work inside. This edge we know is flat. The inside now needs to be turned down, just like doing our little bowl. I have a bowl. It's a different size one. I think I don't need that now. Just a little too high. 2 rings, 3rd ring, messy. Okay, a lot of cleaning up in here to be done, and a better tool might be to use one of these round nose scrapers. Raise the tool rest a little bit so that this can be worked downhill, and I can make it all the way to the bottom. All the corners have been knocked off inside, some rounding has been done, and it'll be easier now to finish off here. Back up the top. Well, I can't see anymore. I got to get the chips out. Let's see how we're doing. Now, I know it's getting thicker down here because of this. So I'm going to try to get the inside to the shape I think is right, and then bring the outside down to it. Here only. So we're okay. Get some lumps in here. A little more cleanup to do. Now the vessel doesn't require me to have the hand on the outside for support, but it does give me a chance to use my thumb against the scraper, and it feels like I have more control of the tool that way. Now I feel a joint between the first segmented ring and the second segmented ring, so I'm not quite down to where I need to be. Tool's getting pretty dull. I'm going to have to sharpen here in a minute. But I'm going to make one more cut and then go to the sharpener. I want a sharp tool for my final cut inside, and I'm down to what will be the final cut. So I'm going to sign off for a second, go up to the grinder, put a new edge on this tool. I'll be right back. Back from the grinder, new edge on the scraper. This curly eucalyptus is very, very hard. And the inside looks pretty good. There's still a little bit right at the bottom, and that's what I'll take care of now. One continuous cut, faded out towards the top because that was already where I wanted it to be. Wall thickness is pretty good, except one spot's a little proud. Nobody will ever know, but I'm going to fix it anyway. Okay, good. Bottom's done. This edge has been flattened, but not on this lathe. I'm going to hit it with the sanding stick anyway. Every lathe is unique and different, even though they are all the same, so to speak. Let's just hit that edge just to be sure it's good and flat. I'm going to call the bottom done. It comes off. And the top, which we glued that ring onto, we now do it. I know I have to flatten this. Looks good. So that edge is true. Let's check for any faults that I may have missed. That looks good. So now we'll turn the inside. Just like we did the bottom, except it's not quite as deep. Now, one thing I need to know is the thickness of this wall so I can make the two match inside. It's not going to be visible, but I want them to match. Many vessels, the inside is something you can see, and the joint does not need to be visible. Okay, stepped out for just a second to get my calipers. I'll measure this wall thickness. Lock my calipers. Ooh, right there. I want to be sure that I had those two match. Okay. Yep, time to go to my scraper. Finish up the inside. Feels pretty good. Let's put the two pieces together. Flattened, we know that because we did it. We'll move this back to the tailstock. And we're going to put our base back on the headstock. Now, several things I noticed. First of all, that this wasn't quite tight. Where's my pencil mark? There it is. And my pencil mark, it's there. So my joint is going to be literally right there. Now, the tailstock may actually sag just a little bit. I can feel this one. There's always a little play. So I'm pushing it up a little bit. And there's our shape. So the next thing to do is actually glue those two halves together, which I will do right now. I'm going to take this out of here for a second. I'm going to set this here as a little workstation while I put a little bit of glue on. Here's a place I don't want an excess because I don't want to have a glue line inside that I have to worry about cleaning up. A little on the outside is not a problem because I'm going to turn the outside and sand it anyway. So, done. Screw back on. Pencil marks here. Pencil marks here. Not much of a pencil mark left, but it's enough I can tell. Now, see that bead of glue? Don't wipe that off. I want it to dry there, because if I wipe it, I'm going to spread it into the rounding fibers, and when I put finish on, it's going to prevent the finish from penetrating properly. So I want that glue to dry, create a dry bead, which I will turn away. So we're going to wait for just a couple of minutes, and we'll be back after the glue is set enough, because my next test is to part off this faceplate, and there's not enough strength here for about 5 minutes. We'll be back in about 5. Well, time has passed, maybe 5 minutes. The glue has tacked well enough that I can go ahead and finish turning. This glue here is still a little wet to the touch, but it'll come away fine. So what I'm going to do now is bring this neck down to its final dimensions and part this off. What almost always happens is when I part this off, things move a little bit. So there's going to be some little bit of shifting. I'm just going to touch the glue and get it off. And And there'll be a little bit more work there in a while. But let's take this neck down. See, our drawing says it comes down and has just a little bit of a lip right at the top. So I'm working towards that. That's the curve. That's a curve I want. Now let's separate that. We'll part that off. Now before I cut all the way through, I'm going to come back in here because I now can see where the edge is and do any little fixes I need to do to correct that curve. That's more like what I want. And now I'll go ahead and finish parting it off. Overlapping cuts like always. Done. Well, this is no longer needed. But now I got some work inside here to do, just on the inside of that neck, to bring it to where I'd like it to be. You can see it started to wobble a little bit. It almost always moves just a share, just a little bit. Now, this is hanging out a long way. We have a somewhat weak glue joint, so my cuts are going to be fairly light. Okay, now there's a sharp edge, and I'm going to make that go away with sandpaper later. The rest of that work is a little bit of the 80 grit gouge. Okay, now we're going on down to the bottom. And what I'm going to do now is bring the bottom down to the final shape that I really wanted in the first place. So no pressure here. I'm going to bring this down with a little sandpaper later. But now I know okay, the shape's almost right. Now I got to bring the base, the walnut base down. Okay, a few things to be cautious about here. Number one, I'm going from a cross grain to a end grain, side grain. This is the orientation of the walnut. So I have side grain, but it also comes around, I have end grain. So I'm going from one kind of cut to a different one here. I'm also going from a very hard wood to a very soft wood. So as you work across multiple species of wood in your project, be very cautious as you transfer from one into the other. So I can feel the cuts change. We got a lot of work to do here, but most of it at this point is sanding. So we've got a vessel. I'm going to do one last thing here, and I'm going to take and put a parting cut at where I think the bottom of the foot is going to be. This is for... I'm trying to decide, is that too long? Maybe a little bit. Not a deep cut, and it's not intended to be a deep cut. All I've done is create a place for my eye to stop. I know where the bottom is, and I can see right now it flares up a little bit. I don't want to flare there. I want it to curve in. So now I can go back and make one last little cut down at the bottom here. Bring that in where I think it ought to be. More like that. But I couldn't see that until I put that parting cut in. So that's there. And right now, we'll move the tool rest out of the way. Grab a little bit of sandpaper here. I got more sanding to do. I've got several grades to go through. And then I'm going to start building my finish, but it stays here on the faceplate until I'm totally done with this project. So right now, as far as this video goes, we are just about done. Yuck. So, work to do. Sanding, a little bit of smoothing. I'm going to add several coats of finish to it. I'm also going to put finish on the inside as well as the outside. I want both walls to have been sealed. The purpose of that seal is to make sure that the wood has equal movement inside and out. I don't want to have any pressure. Okay, where are we going next? Well, I'm going to do another thing sort of like this, but we're going to take you to another level. I want to talk about spacers. I want to talk about splitting a ring, making thin rings. And I'm going to talk a little bit about using veneers. This is the first of 2 different times I'm going to talk about veneers. Here's what I mean. This is the ring in which the segment is cut on the darker wood, and the lighter wood piece here is just a flat that's put in there. And I'm going to tell you how I do that. Here's a ring that is done with just segments and veneers in between. That requires some special effort. Veneers don't behave like wood. So I'm going to talk to you about how all this is done. And I'm going to show you how I split and core a ring to get other sizes from one glue up. All that in the next video. Keep coming back. We enjoy your comments and your suggestions. Subscribe. We'll see you in the next series on segmented turning.